that there should be rights also for people in non-romantic, non-love relationships. So I've argued in favour of what I've called a civil commitment pact, which will allow a person to nominate any significant other in their life as their next of kin and beneficiary in the event of their death. So it might be two people in love, or it could be a favourite niece or nephew, two elderly widows who live together. It could be a brother, a favourite best friend. What I'm trying to do in that legal framework is to extend rights, for example, to single people. I think it's very wrong that a single person doesn't have the right to pass on their property to a designated person without having them pay swinging inheritance tax. I don't think that privilege should apply only to married couples. I think it should also apply to single people, including widowers and widows. Yeah. So I'm trying to make the system fairer. But that's a separate debate. And I think we should have a separate debate. But I think this issue right now is about heterosexual couples can get married. If that's the case, surely in a democratic, fair society, other people of the same gender whose love is just as real and sincere, they should have the same option, even if I personally may not wish to take it up.
Can I just pick up on in your opening comments and put it to you, David, about the charge of discrimination and the lack of equality from a position that says that marriage should only be heterosexual?
Well, when you're accused of the lack of equality and discrimination, of course, to me, that's a form almost of emotional bullying, because that's the sin against the holy state. I mean, everyone says they're for equality. In actual fact, we all discriminate in many different ways. I don't think that when people talk of equal marriage, Peter still didn't answer my question, why two brothers shouldn't marry, apart from general public consensus. And let me just say something about the public consensus thing, because I am disappointed that you said that, because you're a radical. And 10 years ago, public consensus was overwhelmingly against same-sex marriage. I'm not even convinced, actually. Opinion polls, it depends how you ask the question. The cleverest thing that the same-sex marriage campaign did was to change the question to equal marriage, because everyone's got to be for equality. But you're a radical, I'm a radical as well. I honestly actually don't care what public opinion says. I care what's right and what's wrong. If public opinion says the Jews should go to the gas chamber, I'm not interested. If public opinion says we should discriminate against black people, I'm not interested. If public opinion says we should let the rich strip the country of its wealth, I'm not interested. What public opinion says, to me, we determine what's right and wrong, not by public opinion, and certainly not by public opinion in a society which is dominated by a few elites, particularly in the media. So that is not a basis for determining what is right and what is wrong. And public opinion in 5-6 years' time could well change towards something else. And I was a little bit disappointed you went down that route. But the discrimination side of it, I would say, is simply this. You cannot have same-sex marriage, which was my opening point really, without redefining marriage for everyone and changing marriage for everyone. I understand your commitment, for which you have suffered, and you know, there's a lot of things I appreciate about you, and one of them is this, that you've been prepared to suffer for what you believe, your commitment to equality and non-discrimination against homosexuals. I honestly think you've either made a mistake on this one, or you're such an intelligent man, I find it difficult. I think that you realize that by redefining marriage, ultimately we will be destroying what you perceive as traditional marriage. And I actually think we may well be completely agreed on this. I think the politicians have been completely fooled. I think you've done a fantastic job in fooling them. I think you've run a fantastic campaign. I think you did change your mind. You were very strongly against gay rights activists arguing for same-sex marriage because it was comfortable, middle-class, Blairite. But I do think, forgive me saying this, I do think you've realized, well, wait a minute, this is not just a statement. I better not name him, but there was a prominent gay rights activist, very involved with the government, who told me, I'm not really interested in same-sex marriage, it's just making a statement about the acceptability of homosexual relationship in today's society. That actually is a different question.
So just we try and steer it away from too much personalising, but you've made your point. You'll have a right to answer that, and then I want to get on to another element of the law. But you want to answer that as he sort of made a personal.
Yeah, I agree with David that populism should not be the driving force of our moral, ethical choices. We should stand for what is right, and of course, I began campaigning for gay rights and for many other human rights causes way back in the 1960s when these issues were deeply, deeply unpopular. And I was a very isolated minority voice, with others, of course, not just me, but with others. And it was a very difficult, lonely, and frustrating period for many, many years. And it's taken 40 years of my life to get to a situation where in Britain today we have almost full legal equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people. So that is a long haul, long overdue, but it's a great relief that we've made that progress. For me, I think it is really, really important to put out of one's mind the idea that same-sex marriage is going to somehow destroy or undermine marriage as an institution. I just can't see how that can happen. I look at the friends of mine who are gay and lesbian who want to get married. Many of them are people of faith. Many of them are Christians. There is nothing about them that is undermining faith or marriage. They are absolutely as devout as any heterosexual Christian. Their love is just as real. I just can't understand why anybody could see how that undermines or weakens the institution. To me, it is actually strengthening it. It's from those who are in favour of marriage, to have more people getting married makes the institution stronger.
Before you answer that, can I just dig a bit deeper on your sort of gospel, as it were, is the Universal Declaration, but deep down, where do you derive your morality from? What is the basis of it? Because in one sense, there's a clash. What you believe is wrong, is right. What you believe is wrong is right. So where do you derive your moral basis?
Well, my morality comes, I suppose, out of the humanist tradition, but draws on the Christian and other religious traditions as well. I was brought up in the church. I still hold true to Christian values such as I am my brother and sister's keeper, that we should not walk by on the other side. We should be good Samaritans to those in suffering, in trouble and difficulty and who suffer. Blessed are the peacemakers. All those kinds of values are very much my values, but I don't see them as being exclusively religious values. And I think that the humanist tradition, which I identify with, believes that we have the capacity as human beings to reason and evolve philosophies, ideas, moralities, without the need for holy texts or divine intervention. So, for example, John Stuart Mill's great idea that, the only role for the law is to protect people from harm. That's not a religious value, it's a philosophical value, which I think has driven much of the argument for the decriminalisation of homosexuality and equal rights for lesbian and gay people. If harm is not being done, then the law has no business to discriminate. And I think, when it comes to marriage, I don't see how in any way allowing same-sex marriage undermines or weakens or threatens or harms heterosexual married couples at all. It doesn't devalue or diminish their marriages. Their marriages are just as strong and real and sincere as they always were. And I'd say that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is one of the great documents that human beings have evolved by reason, by conscience, by debate, from people all over the world, in many different continents, contributed to that document. And I think it enshrines principles, some of which are entirely consistent with Christian and other religious values.
Okay. And now I'll give you a chance to answer about, does it harm? Does gay marriage harm marriage?
I mean, maybe when it comes to viewers putting in questions and so on, they might want to go into this in more detail. Of course, the obvious answer to that is only time will tell. There are a vast majority of countries in the world still do not have it. Those who do have it have had it for a maximum of 10 years. Take a country like the Netherlands. There was a formal academic study done which showed that the average length of a gay partnership lasted 1.5 years. And actually during those 1.5 years, each was likely to have at least 8 other sexual encounters. I just don't... We don't have enough evidence yet. I think people keep reassuring us, and again, Peter will forgive me for being cynical about that, because I have to come back and say, where are we getting this from, and where does marriage come from? And your question about values, if I can say something about that, because going back to Peter's opening statement about love, I'm sorry, Peter, I don't want the state defining love. 2 people who love one another. I've asked politicians over and over again, what do you mean by love? And I mean, it's like that Daily Mail cartoon that goes on forever. You know, love is giving someone your last Rolo. I mean, what is, sorry for the advert, but what is love? Is the state going to define love? You can only get married if you truly love one another, and there's going to be a state registrar or thought police that will tell you that. It's a word that's easy to use. I don't think the state should be in the business of determining whether people love one another or not. But
that's not the state's role.
Yeah.
People decide whether they love each other, and the law decides that if they wish, they can have the legal rights and responsibilities that go with marriage. The state is not dictating, it's people choosing, and then the state giving validation to their choice.
Yes, but whenever I've asked a politician about what marriage is, they've said, in our eyes, it is when 2 people love one another. So they are bringing love into this. They're not saying what love is, and they're saying this is how they define it. In terms of a legal basis, it's absolutely appalling, and it can be absolutely shot through. But the question of love is, you're right. I mean, that is fundamental and absolutely key. I would argue that God is love. I would argue that you will get human beings use love in all different kinds of ways. You will often find, and you know this, you will often find that a child who's been abused or a woman who has been abused has been told by the person who's done the abusing, well, I love you. But
that's not mutual. You're talking about a position of power where someone has exploited and abused someone else.
And yet,
we're talking about like with like. A heterosexual man and a woman, like my mother and father, fell in love, they loved each other.
Yeah.
That's the kind of love we're talking about, and that's the kind of love that many same-sex couples also have. The only difference is they happen to be of opposite genders. I just want to pick you up on that phony statistic you quoted. Yeah. That is not true at all, that the average same-sex relationship lasts only 1.5 years. In fact, there's been some research in some countries about where they have introduced same-sex marriage, and they've actually found that the rate of divorce is less among same-sex couples than among heterosexual couples, and that the stability of the relationships appears to be equivalent to that of heterosexual couples. So I think that's very unfair to use statistics like that, because that's not borne out by the evidence. And as I said, I have several friends, well, probably more than a dozen friends, who've been together 30+ years. Mm-hmm. They would like the right to marry. They would like the right to have their love acknowledged on the same basis as their heterosexual friends and families. Why is it that in the case of 2 brothers, one who's straight, he can marry and have his love validated, but his other brother who's gay, who's been in a relationship for just as long period of time, until now, has not been able to. That's just not fair.
Yeah. Well, I come back to the question, I mean, you actually brought it back to this question, which you've still not answered, about why 2 brothers who might both be gay and who might love one another shouldn't be able to get married if you're going to have equal marriage.
Okay, but, well, I'll answer it.
Yeah. Okay, answer that now then, please.
2 brothers who love each other, that love is not the same as romantic love between couples, whether they be gay or straight.
Who says?
Well, a heterosexual couple love each other.
Yes.
That's a different kind of love to brotherly love or love between best friends. I have best friends that I love, but it's not the same kind of love as between me and a partner I might have. So I think it's again about comparing.
It has been.
It's about comparing like with like.
Mm. Well, I would compare like with like. I think you're making distinctions that if there were a couple who came to you and said, well, actually, we do love each other, and we do love each other in the way that you're talking about, I think you're using love in a variety of different ways. But I'll come back to those statistics because you picked me up on them. I wasn't talking about the rate of divorce in terms of civil partnerships, because again, we haven't had enough time to see how that is going to work out.
We do know the statistics.
No, but
we know the statistics.
Yes, but as you know, a societal change is a lot more than over just 3 or 4 years. We're talking about, we will see, the answer to this will be in 25 years' time. And I'll be very, very interested to see what that is.
But you shouldn't quote 1.5 years when the statistics based on existing civil partnerships and in other countries based on existing civil marriages is not 1.5 years.
No, I said, if you listen to me, I'd said there was a study, a formal academic study, that showed, this was actually in 2003, I can give you the citation of it, Zeridou et al., and they looked at male homosexual relationships. We're not talking about civil partnerships because I think it was it not 2004 that Holland started, somewhere around that. But they're talking about male homosexual relationships last on average 1.5 years, and gay men have an average of 8 partners a year outside of these committed relationships. Now,
well, I'd be very interested to see the base of that study.
I'll give you the study.
But we should be. We're not. As you said, this is not a statistical evidence based upon civil partnerships or civil marriages, and that is what we're talking about.
Yes.
And from the evidence of existing civil marriages in various countries and civil partnerships in this country, the rate of divorce and breakdown is roughly the same, with some minor exceptions, as with heterosexual marriages.
Yes.
I want to break you because we're getting near to our sort of final quadrant, and I want to move into the area of the education of children and where they fit into it, and children within a marriage. How do you see it progressing? Because the only opportunity is through, I suppose, for lesbians, IVF, but for generally adoption or marriage has always been for procreation and the nurturing and bringing up of children. Do you see that as an integral part of same-sex marriage?
Well, first of all, I think we need to start from the point of view of the interests and welfare of the child. Many same-sex couples do have children, some from previous marriages when they were in heterosexual relationships, some from fostering and adoption, and some from either fertility treatment, donor insemination, or surrogacy. Those children need the stability of a loving home environment. They would benefit from the stability provided by marriage. So you could say, from the interest and welfare of the child, it is important to give same-sex couples, particularly those with children, the right to marry, so they can have that legal framework of rights and responsibilities, and so their children can have the security of being within a marriage-family relationship. Beyond that, I think, of course, there are many heterosexual couples who do not have children. Some never have the prospect of having children because they're either infertile or they're past the menopause. So I don't think marriage should be predicated on the having children or the ability to have children. That is a factor, I agree, but it's not the criterion by which marriage should be determined.
And just coming back on this subject, but to what I said earlier about the barriers, I mentioned, and we talked about multiple partners, but what about the age? When is it appropriate for someone to enter into a relationship?
Well, I think under the marriage law, you can get married at 16 with parental consent. So, that should apply to heterosexual couples, homosexual couples.
And do you think it's appropriate, even heterosexual or homosexual, to have that age so low set? Well, especially in the context of bringing up the next generation.
Well, I think it's probably not advisable for people of 16 and 17 to have children. I think it's probably best to wait, whether they're gay or straight. I think it's adult maturity does tend to bring greater responsibility. I think, on the whole, teenage pregnancy, teenage mothers and fathers are probably not the best for kids. There may be some exceptional examples of very mature young people who can cope with it, but on the whole, I think it's probably best if people wait a bit until they're financially, emotionally stable in a marriage or marriage-like relationship.
Put the same question to you. You know, what do you think the implications are to the next generation and for children?
Well, first of all, I'm going to agree with Peter. I have a daughter who's just turned 16 a couple of weeks ago. And no, she's not getting married. Not with my blessing anyway, not at 16. I mean, for me, she's very mature and very capable, but, you know, it would be, I think, very inadvisable. So I agree with Peter's last remark. But I think he's raised something of huge significance in terms of what marriage actually is, which comes back to this whole question. The question is not about equal legal rights and so on. The question is about what marriage is. Solas had put a submission into the Scottish Parliament when they, inverted commas, consulted, though it wasn't really much of a consultation on this. And we said this, reflecting Christian teaching throughout the ages, Catholic teaching today, and the vast majority of Christian churches. The meaning of marriage is straightforward. It is the union between one man and one woman for the threefold purpose of mutual companionship, the procreation and upbringing of children in a secure environment, and the good of society. Now, Peter is mentioning exceptions. The exceptions being that, you know, people who get married who are not able to have children, usually when I've been asked this many times, if a couple came to you and they knew they weren't able to have children, would you still marry them? And I said, yes, of course I would. Though it's very, very unlikely to happen in that way, because most people don't know. But what I would say is that it's part of the fundamental aspects of marriage, and this is where I come in with the society and the poor and children and so on, that two parents, and I would argue better two biological parents. I am not going to attack single mothers, some of whom do an exceptional job, and I'm not going to say that just because a child has two gay parents, inverted commas, maybe one's a parent, one's, you know, they're obviously not both their biological parents, but two parents at least legally and in the home. I'm not going to say that they would be badly I would rather a child be brought up by two caring, responsible and loving homosexuals, if you like, than an abusive heterosexual couple. I mean, obviously there are balances in that. However, there have been studies that have been done that show that it's something like 20 times people are more likely to turn out homosexual if they're brought up by homosexual parents. We're in there to the nature-nurture debate, and again, that's maybe something that will come up later. But I do think that in the traditional Christian understanding and the understanding that's been the foundation of Western society for at least 1,500 years, is that marriage is between a man and a woman, and a major part of that marriage is that the ability to procreate and to bring up children. And we're saying, no, we can do that with two males or two females. You can't without the intervention of a third party. And I think that complicates things.
Can I speak up on this point? You're saying that in the case of children brought up by same-sex couples, they're 20 times more likely to end up homosexual themselves. That is not borne out by the evidence. The evidence of surveys all across the world has shown on the contrary. The most famous pioneering study was by two professors at City University in London, which followed children from the ages of 9 to 21, so a 14-year study comparing children brought up in heterosexual households and those brought up in same-sex households. They found absolutely no difference in the child's emotional or psychological development, no difference in their academic performance, no difference in any aspect, including no difference in the proportion of the children who ended up being gay, lesbian or bisexual. The one thing they did find is that children brought up in same-sex families tend to be more open-minded, more liberal, more tolerant of difference, more accepting of others. That was the only difference they found.
Now, just to say, this is going to be your closing remarks, so try and broaden it. We're going to give you just over a minute.
Well, when I hear the words open-minded, liberal and tolerant, I think of the amount of hate mail and abuse I've had from people who proclaim themselves to be open-minded, liberal or intolerant. I think these are buzzwords. that I want to see them in action. I'd love to see that study, and afterwards you can give it to me, because I have got studies that go the other way, and I've become deeply cynical about vested interests in studies. But if these are to be my closing remarks on this, I think that I want to come back to your opening remark, which still remains with me and which is the fundamental of this. It's love and how we define love. I'm saying that God is love. I'm saying that God, in his love, created us as human beings in his image. I'm saying that I'm an IKEA person. What I mean by that is I'm not a carpenter. I go to IKEA, I take home a box, I open up the box, I lay out all the screws, I count the screws, I follow the instructions, obey the maker's instructions. I think God has given us instructions for marriage, for bringing up children, for the good of society. I think that at best your position is not proven. I would argue that historically, in actual fact, when marriage is chopped and changed in that way, it's been disastrous. I think it will be disastrous. I have no intention whatsoever of discriminating against or harming homosexuals. Some, I do not like. I don't look at you and say, well, Peter Tatchell is a homosexual. I look at you and say, Peter Tatchell is a human being. But you're a human being in need of the love of God in the same way as everyone else is. And part of God's love is to say, I want you to do it this way.
Got it. Peter, you've got just under a couple of minutes.
Well, I think it's been a very interesting, challenging debate, and I think we've debated very respectfully, which is the way it should be. Obviously, we have some differences in the way we approach this issue. But at the end of the day, for me, as David says, it does boil down to this issue of love. And, when I look at my gay and lesbian friends who are in long-term relationships, I see their loyalty, commitment, fidelity, love, just as real as that of my heterosexual friends. I can't see the difference. I see loving, supportive families, gay and straight. And